So hi everyone, I'm Guillaume. I'm glad to be here tonight. I almost died 15 times today due to bikes. I'm not used to that, so I'm very happy to be alive tonight with you guys. So I'm going to talk about two things. I have two kind of talks that I'm going to kind of bring together. One is Stripe is in Fintech, and Stripe was started 5 years ago. Stripe is now a little bigger, but used to be a startup not so long ago. And so kind of the first topic I'd like to discover with you guys is lessons that we've learned looking back at what worked well in terms of growth, in terms of the recipes to get good and healthy growth going. That's one, looking at Stripe as a company. The second topic I'd like to explore with you guys is more related to payments. We happen to do payments, and kind of if you guys are working on your startup or starting a startup, the question is, how do you think about payments, and how can payments actually help you grow quicker and better and convert better? So that's kind of the second topic. So we really have two different kind of angles tonight. I'm going to try to be exhaustive. So maybe just a few words about myself. So I'm Guillaume. I'm leading Southern Europe at Stripe, based in Paris. I've been in Stripe for 2 years now. I was one of the first people outside of the US at Stripe when Stripe was starting to expand internationally, in particular in Europe. So I've been working quite a bit, not only on developing that sub-region I just mentioned, but also kind of on how to scale this company outside of the US in terms of many things that you guys can imagine. Before that, so my background is in engineering. I did some consulting, some digital consulting, including at McKinsey. I did an MBA in the US, kind of in the middle. I started my own mobile startup, which was a total failure, but that happens. And that's about it. So I started Stripe 2 years ago. So now on to the first topic. So maybe, how many of you actually know Stripe, just to get a quick sense? Okay. How many of you actually know what Stripe does? Okay, that's pretty correlated. Good, okay. Very quickly on this, just to give you some context, what does Stripe do? Stripe has essentially made it as easy as ever to get paid on the internet. So essentially, when you think about starting a business on the internet or on mobile, well, if you want it to be sustainable, you somehow have to get paid. Otherwise, you do an advertising-based model, and like you don't need to be a coder to understand that like you actually only need 6 lines of code with Stripe to actually get paid on the internet. That's kind of where it all started. But it's not only that. Stripe kind of, this is my last slide about what we do. Stripe actually enables you to accept payments. That's the basic of what I just showed you. But actually does all sorts of services around payments, all sorts of other things that a startup or a large company actually might need. So we help to optimize conversion in terms of like payment interfaces, especially on mobile. We have a dedicated product for marketplaces. So marketplace is essentially, a seller and a buyer and a platform in the middle, and we kind of deal with the entire flow that you would need to make that system work. We have we have a stack for recurring billing. Think about all types of recurring businesses that you guys know, whether subscriptions or even like services like Uber, etc., where you basically pay on a recurring basis. We also launched a product a few months ago around distributed commerce. How do you actually bring commerce to social media, and how do you actually get paid directly in social media for e-commerce? And we do all this across with a certain number of features. Typically, reporting and management is really easy. International reach, so you can basically day one start a business and get paid anywhere by anyone in the world for your business, for your product, or for your service. 130 currencies supported. We do everything around fraud and security, basically not needing you to be an expert in any sort of fraud, etc. We take care of that for you. And we also have an entire pretty dense ecosystem built on Stripe of applications, of third-party applications that can help you deal with all sorts of other issues or needs that you have as a business. Accounting, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we do. Now, And we work with all sorts of businesses, small, large, but essentially what we're best at is kind of powering the next generation of web businesses and mobile, obviously. Little animation. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do is, I don't want to be theoretical, even though this slide seems theoretical. I'm actually going to tell real stories around each one of these aspects to kind of illustrate what I mean by each one of these aspects. Because many of these things sound pretty, easy, usual, like you've heard it, lots of times. How do you actually make it real, and how does it work in reality? So again, this is looking back at lessons learned from Stripe. But again, this is no course. You guys make what you want out of it, okay? So the first common thought is you don't need to be an industry veteran to actually make something innovative in an industry. Patrick and John, when they started Stripe, it was basically because they had started a company before that was selling stuff online. I'll go quick on that, but they essentially realized that it was very complicated to get paid on the web. Like, it took them months to actually implement something, a solution, to get paid for the products they sold on the web. And then after having sold that company, they thought, hey, but this shouldn't be that hard. And guess what? Every single startup is going through that painful process. Why don't we try to solve this thing for everybody? That's kind of where it came from. They didn't know anything about payments, right? It ended up, payments is actually a pretty complex field, but they just didn't know anything about payments. So don't believe you need to know anything about what you want to build a business in. So that's an interesting one, defining a problem and oversolve it. The thing here is you can always, if you oversolve a problem, and I'll give an example, you can always undersolve it from there, right? But if you undersolve it from the start, you can't, continue pushing to oversolve it. The example here is when they designed the V1 of Stripe, they really wanted to make it super simple to get paid on the internet. And the first version, the V0 of it, was go on this website, click a button, I'll give you an API key, and you can do whatever you want with it to get paid on the web, right? They had actually forgotten to put any login or anything. You don't need a login, you don't need a password. Make it as simple as possible. Well, they actually realized afterwards that it was actually pretty cool to have the email addresses of people, because you want to be able to communicate with them at some point when they send you a message and know who you're actually talking to, right? But that was over-solving the problem. It was overly simplistic to get paid on the web. Finally started asking for an email and a kind of password, but that was kind of starting from over-solving it and going backwards. Right? That's kind of the message. So think about how you can really oversolve this problem you're trying to solve. I think that's, in terms of growth, that's growth hacking at the beginning. That's the most important one, which is, we all know this story about Airbnb and Brian Chesky and his friends knocking on doors in San Francisco to ask people if they wanted to sublet their apartment during vacations, right? Well, this is exactly the same story. Patrick and John were at Y Combinator in the Silicon Valley. They started V0 at Stripe and basically went around all their friends at Y Combinator, sat down with them, took their computer, installed Stripe on whatever website those friends were building at Y Combinator, and kind of got it going that way. So they actually had an installation in a room at Y Combinator where people were queuing to kind of get that thing installed. And then every week, people were queuing to give feedback, and they were iterating on the product in that way. So they were pretty lucky to have this pretty unique ecosystem of people to test and companies to test their product with. But if you're able to build that kind of 10, 20, 30 early users to really test your product, that's where you get it to the right level to be able to go to the next level of kind of number of users. It was actually called the Collison installation at Y Combinator. So it was did you guys go to the Collison installation today? Yes, we do. Yes, we did, etc. Hiring is another thing. So when you take a step back, you can try to hack growth on a kind of micro basis in everything you do. But in the end, if you're a founder or a CEO, take a step back, you're not going to hack every single thing that need to be hacked for growth, right? In the end, people are going to do it. People are going to take micro actions in their day-to-day kind of life and work to actually push the needle, right? When you hire, you always want to hire people to continue pushing the bar, like pushing the standard of your company. Because that's like, in the end, like we always say, people is what matters. Well, that's true. Patrick and John still interview, so there's 450 people at Stripe today, and we're doubling every year. Patrick and John still interview every single person before we make an offer. Every single person still goes through San Francisco to get an interview with either one or the other. That's kind of like time commitment, right? When you think about it. But we believe that that's kind of how you kind of delegate like growth in some sense. This is an interesting one as well. In the same vein as what I was just talking about, which is, in the end, you can be a great founder, like who, pushes for growth, but in the end, you're not the one who's going to make it happen, right? Like when you scale a company. And so one of the things that we've experienced, that we've kind of made big in our culture, is transparency. So I think like many companies say that in the tech world. Just to be concrete, at Stripe, for example, everybody can read the email, and everybody at Stripe can read the email sent by anybody else at Stripe. So we basically have access to all the emails that anybody at Stripe can send internally or externally. It's a pretty bold move. Actually, the way it works, it's pretty simple. Just create Google Groups, and you let people subscribe to the groups they want to subscribe to. And the rule is, every time you send an email, you have to put one of those Google Groups either in CC or in BCC if it's an external email. So essentially, in my inbox, I actually have all the emails of Stripe every day that are sent, right? So then you have to buy a little bit of storage and stuff, but that's another question. But like, you can actually, anybody at Stripe can know like whatever is happening wherever. And by the way, like the reality is you will only follow this and that group because you're actually more interested in this and that, because you basically can't read anything at this stage of the company. Actually, a couple of people read every single email. But the cool thing is, like, not only is it efficient because you don't need to ping this and that person, but people are able to chime in on topics where they're not directly related, but where they actually have some good input to give. And when you think about that, it's pretty interesting. We had a story once. So I had started a Stripe not so long ago when Patrick sent this email saying, "Hey guys, we're thinking about acquiring this company for X million dollars," to the whole company, right? What do you guys think? So, and actually what ended up happening is someone had an insight that others didn't have and happened to answer that, and like it created debate, and we actually ended up not making that acquisition. But like, if that had stayed a very insular conversation between some people, no one could have known that the sister of the cousin of whoever actually had some information that made us not make the deal, right? Like, that's actually pretty interesting when you think about it. This is my last one. The one cool thing about, I mean, I don't know how many of you have worked in large companies, but the one cool thing about when you're a startup, because you feel like you've got so many barriers, right? Everything is difficult. Money, finding the team, getting the traction, etc. But the one thing is, you're actually pretty agile, and you want to keep that. That's the challenge. So, because you're pretty agile at the beginning, but as you start scaling, that's what's going to make you, like, your business really successful in the long term. Are you able to continue innovating? And when you look around you, like, think about like the tech, very nice tech companies or unicorns or whatever we want to call them. There's kind of two types. Some of them still have today essentially the same product that they had 5 or 10 years ago. I'm not going to give any names, and others, I'll give names, like, I mean, Facebook is continuing to innovate every day, right? And we all see that. We all read the news, right? You want to be that type of company. Facebook is whatever, tens of thousands of employees and whatever valuation. But like, the power of Facebook, of the company itself, is that even if it's become a large company, it's actually still able to innovate as much as a startup, a small startup. And that's pretty powerful. You want to keep that, because that's where you're going to continue to grow, right? And yeah, I mean, there's this thing that we talk about a lot internally, which is like, how do you make sure like people in the company have that in mind? Like, and basically in terms of culture, what you want to make sure people have in mind is that, you know, they're still in a we're just getting started attitude. Like, we're repeating that to ourselves every day, and it's true. I believe it. We're just getting started. And a year ago, we were still just getting started. And I'm pretty sure in 2 years ago, I hope in 2 years ago, we're still just going to get started, right? That's kind of like, that's an enforcement, and that's also what the founders believe a lot in. And that's what we all believe in at Stripe. That's pretty powerful as a mentality. To do that, there's one interesting thing is, I'll come back to hiring. What kind of people do you want to hire? And the way Stripe hires, again, it's just Stripe, is kind of a mix of, you want people who are ambitious, right? You want people who are going to bring the company to the next level, as I said at the beginning. You want people who are driving towards, you know, like towards growing the company. But at the same time, we look for people who are humble. And so, humble because you want people to stay open, to always think that they're just getting started. And finding people who are ambitious and humble is actually a challenge. But we believe it's pretty critical, and that's one of the main criteria we look at when we hire. Because that humbleness keeps this attitude going. So that was kind of my first piece, looking back at Stripe and kind of a few of the tricks, or it's not really tricks, it's culture elements that I believe work well at Stripe. So a few thoughts, and again, none of these are solutions. So now I'm going to talk about something much more practical. If I can find it. Obviously. Here it is. Okay. We'll do questions at the end if that's okay with you guys. Let's get practical here. Okay. So the question here is okay, I'm supposed to know some stuff about payments. That's what Stripe does. And you guys don't have any reason to be experts in payments. By definition, when you're starting a startup, unless you're a fintech expert, and there might be some in the room, by definition, when you're starting a startup, payments is either nothing, you don't need payments, or it's just one of the things that you have to think about because your product is not only about payments, right? And let me try to help you, because you have no reason to be an expert in payments. Let me try to help you think about how you can use and leverage payments to kind of hack your growth, to grow, right? Payments is not a commodity. And let me start with this page here, which is, there are a few names up there that you guys know or don't. But what's interesting is if you look at each one of these names, payments has played, like innovation in payments or payments has actually played a huge role in their growth. Amazon. So people don't necessarily know this, but Amazon really took off a few years ago. I don't remember what the day was, well, maybe 10 years ago, whatever, when they changed one thing, right? One thing actually made Amazon become what Amazon is today. And that thing is being able to buy in one click. Being able to buy in one click, because people bought more and more on mobile, right? On mobile or even on the internet. And that idea of, oh, let me store your payment data and let me enable you to buy in one click is a huge conversion booster, right? And that's actually what made Amazon that crazy over the past, whatever it is, 8 or 9 years. That's one of the things, but it's a big thing. Payments is actually a huge piece of that. Kickstarter, Airbnb. So Think about, I don't know how much you guys use Kickstarter, but think about Kickstarter. So the whole model is based on the fact that as a project, you're asking for money. Say you're asking for 100K. You will get that money only if the promises that people make add up to 100K. If you're asking for 100K and you only get 60,000, you will not get 60,000. You will get 0, right? Because the whole idea is if you're asking for 100K to do your project, then if you get less, well, you won't be able to deliver your project. And so Kickstarter doesn't want that in terms of brand and everything, right? But think about like the mechanism behind that. Like a Kickstarter project can run for months. And so you're asking people to pay like month M0 and maybe only get the money M+3 or something, right? There is a pretty complex payment mechanism behind that, right? Well, that's what enables Kickstarter to do what they want to do, what they believe is the right thing as a model. And until today, it's been pretty successful. Airbnb. This is basically, the business of Airbnb is basically enabling anyone in the world to pay in their local currency to anyone else in the world to receive their money in their own local currency. And by the way, the platform will take X% for its own. And by the way, you can reimburse if the person doesn't go to the place or whatever. Like that's a pretty complex thing in terms of payments as well. And like if Airbnb were not able to do that, they would not be what they are today, right? Like this is actually pretty central to what they do. I'll go quick on the last two ones. Last two ones, you know them or you don't. They're developer tools mostly that work with subscription models. Again, like they want to be able to have a payment stack that enables them to do subscriptions and to be reimbursed, to create coupons, discount codes, et cetera, and like that's actually a big piece of their like growth hacking and ability, right? To be able to kind of create coupons and other stuff. So like my message here is like payments is actually important, and payments is actually pretty critical to some of the most successful internet businesses of the past years. So there's 4 things we're going to talk about here regarding payments. And the whole idea in this first part is you want to get stuff done. So when you're starting your startup, you don't want to spend time on the payments piece. You want to spend time building the product that's going to get to the right product market fit. We all know that's the most complicated thing because you want to get that product market fit, right? You don't want to bother with payments. That's point 1, like the most important point. So I'll go quick, but payment seems easy. It's actually very complicated, right? I said that in the previous discussion, right? It can get very complicated. Don't make your life difficult. You want one payment provider to deal with who's going to deal with all the back office and all the complex stuff of the financial world. Okay? Don't spend more time on that, on payments than that, right? Quality of the tools, of the API, et cetera, is also something important. I won't spend too much time on this, but the whole idea, I think you get it, is you don't want to spend time on the payment piece of what you're building. Ease of use every day, you want the dashboards that are right, and also you want to choose an ecosystem that enables kind of your payment world to interact with whatever other needs you have regarding payments. So if you want like your team to be notified on Slack whenever a payment doesn't go through, you want to be able to make that connection easily. If you want, to have some IFTT rules based on payments, then you want to be able to do that easily. So you want to choose someone who's actually integrated to all those various tools. I mean, there's just a few here, but there are many other tools you might want to integrate with. Another thing is metrics, right? Like who wants to spend his day when he's starting his business calculating metrics on his Excel spreadsheet? Seriously. Like, wouldn't you rather have, we'll get to questions at the end if that's okay. Cool? It's a good one. Soon. Stay tuned. I was actually going to talk about that. I'll come back to that. Okay, soon. The answer is very soon. Okay, so if you guys are convinced, I'm not selling anything, I'm just telling you best practices about payments. Okay, the other thing is UX. Okay, we talk about growth hacking. UX is kind of something that's going to increase your conversion. I guess that's pretty obvious. Minimize your user input. Like, seems crazy to some people, but like for cards, for example, you don't need anything else than a card number, the expiry date, and the 3 numbers at the behind the card. You don't need anything else to get a payment through. You don't need the name, you don't need the whatever zip code, etc. That's like, still wonder why people ask for that stuff, especially on mobile, because people don't type that in mobile. Don't redirect your user away. Like, we've seen crazy results. Like, whenever you need to redirect your user to banks or to other payment providers, right? We all know the story. You're losing people along the way. And by the way, think about that. You're trying to create a brand. Do you really want to, like, to give part of the experience of the user to a third party where you don't control what's going on, that has a different logo, that has a different experience and different feel than, you know, the experience you want them to have? You don't want that. Like, companies like that are actually in competition with you for the consumer, right? Think about that. Like, you don't want them to take away the consumer from you. Okay, it's pretty obvious, right? Okay, this is pretty bad practice. We all have this terrible experience paying on mobile, right? So how do you think about mobile? And mobile is obviously the future of the internet. You want the right design. You want one-click payments. You don't need these guys to do one-click payments. Like, you can save cards and do all sorts of fun stuff by saving cards, like Uber does, like Airbnb does, like all those people do. You want to be able to do that easily, right? Apple Pay and Android Pay is pretty cool too. It's coming, expanding to the rest of to the world. So it's just not in every market yet. But those are things that are ultimately going to make it easier to pay on mobile, in-app. Fraud is a big thing. Talked about that already. You guys don't have any reason to be experts in fraud, right? So just, delegate that to whoever is good in fraud. Okay, so in Amsterdam, I think this is a message that's pretty clear to people. You guys tend to think global from the start. Payments, what does that mean in the payments world, right? So look at just taking a step back, the size of the e-commerce markets in the world, right? Netherlands is something around 10-15 billion euros. Europe is 350 billion. If you add the US to that, it's double, it's 700 billion. And if you add the rest of the world to that, it's double again, right? So you get to 1.4, 1.5 thousand billion, that's right. Yeah, that's crazy, trillion. And so, think about when you launch your product or your service, think about how you can try to play on a larger field, the largest field as possible on day one. The reason for that is we have quite a few pretty cool stories, like the story of these guys. These guys are, so these guys created their business in the UK. And so they created a business in biking, so maybe it works here too, for doing accessories for bikers, kind of a little hipster accessories, right? They created this thing in the UK, put it online. And then what they realized, because everybody, after 2 months, they did some analytics and they were trying to be clever about stuff, and they realized one thing, which was something like 70% of the people visiting their website were actually had a Japanese IP, right? So 70% of the people visiting their website were Japanese. So they thought about that, and then they did other analysis, because they're clever people. And so, but they realized that those Japanese people did not convert. So they had a really bad conversion rate. And they changed one thing. That increased the conversion rate by 50%. And that one thing was displaying the currency of the IP that was on the other side. And Japanese don't buy in euros. They don't buy in British pounds, right? And it's the same thing for many other kind of markets and countries, right? Japanese buy in yen. That's how they do things. They don't even buy in USD. So these guys, day one, were thinking global. The one thing they hadn't thought about was the currency piece. But like, and today, Japan is like 70 or 80% of their market. They would have, I mean, they would have stopped their company if it hadn't been for trying out Japanese users, because their real market is actually in Japan. Maybe they have a few new users tonight, but their real market is Japan. They had no idea that could actually be like the truth initially, right? So whenever, like, if you're able to launch regionally, globally, whatever, like, you're just increasing the chances of getting a product market fit somewhere in the world. And so today, like, yeah, I mean, they have a team in Japan as well, doing marketing and all sorts of fun stuff, and it's working pretty well. Okay, so I don't need to convince you guys, because as some people pointed out, there's not only credit cards in the world. Some people have Ideal. That's a interesting payment method, right? But there are lots of others, and so you also want to work with someone who's, like, if you want to go global day one, able to propose those. And so to answer the question over there from Sir with the hat, yes, we are obviously working on that, and stay tuned, because Ideal, like, I mean, I'm not going to say much more tonight. Do some teasing, but of course we know, like, that's the reason why we've been here actually, like, operating in beta for some time, which was like, we want to make sure we understand the market, right? And that's how we go to market. We first go to beta in markets, and then we realize there's a few things that are missing, right? And then we work on it, and so we understand. We got the message. Got a few Dutch tickets saying, hey, something missing in your portfolio here. So stay tuned. But we do all other fun stuff like Alipay. Chinese people don't pay by credit cards. They pay with Alipay. There's 300 million Chinese people who buy on the internet today. They use this thing called Alipay. It's actually the Alibaba kind of payment method. Well, if you want to have access to this pretty big market, you need this kind of payment method. The last message, and this is kind of where I'm, looping back, is don't reinvent the wheel. These people have been kind of pioneers in their craziness, right? Of business models, of innovation models, etc. But guess what? Like, all the complex payment instruments or payment infrastructures these people have built or implemented are now available off the shelf. Like, if you want to build a marketplace with, like, the characteristics of the Airbnb marketplace, Airbnb actually took like 3 years to set it up. In terms of payments, well, guess what? It's actually available off the shelf now. Like, in a few days, you've actually implemented it for your startup. You're kind of playing, at equal level with someone like Airbnb from a payments innovation perspective, right? Thanks to tools like, like Stripe. Same for the others. But basically, the message is, leveling the playing field is something we try to do to kind of encourage innovation and the next generation of web businesses. When you think about it, Airbnb and Uber weren't around 8 years ago. Well, they just started 8 years ago. I'm pretty convinced we're just getting started in terms of e-commerce. Look at, like, the adoption of mobile, right? Mobile is the next wave. Actually, it's just getting started, mobile, right? It is the next wave of innovation. And in 10 years from now, I'm pretty sure there will be other Uber and Airbnbs that no one has thought about today. So this is just the start. That's all I had to say. So happy to take questions. Yes, I will repeat the question. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, you guys Stripe launched Atlas, a new product or new service, a month ago. So why did you do that, and how are you actually growing it today? So why did we do Atlas? So, okay, the story is Stripe believes in what I basically said at the end, which is in innovation and new startups, new businesses getting started. And so we believe there's talent and entrepreneurs everywhere in the world who have good ideas and who are able to execute them. Like, it's everywhere in the world. The problem is, unfortunately, there are countries or markets where people don't have the basic infrastructural tools to bring those ideas or those businesses globally, right? If you're, I don't want to point out, any country, but if you're in some countries in Africa, some countries in LATAM, some countries in Asia, etc., you just don't have, it's just very difficult to set up a company legally. It's very difficult to get a bank account. And by the way, the bank account is a currency that's not very stable. It's very difficult to get access to a payment solution that actually can enable you to sell globally, etc., etc. Those tools are just not available. And so the idea of Atlas was to say, hey, let's help those people actually, and let's give them an opportunity to get access to the tools that are available in the first version of Atlas in the US. So we're going to enable, via an API, anyone in the world to start a company in the US, incorporated in the US, with a US bank account of a US bank, and a Stripe account if he wants to use it, and all sorts of services from Amazon, AWS, and lawyer services. Essentially, you're sitting in, Chile, and you can set up a business in the US. Chile, or whatever. I'm going to have good difficulties saying a country that's not represented in the room, but so that's the idea. So we launched that a month ago, and we've seen amazing traction. I can't give numbers, but amazing traction all over the world, people wanting this service. And so to the question, so that's the why. Now the first thing is, this is a beta. We're only doing this for the US to start with, because we wanted to see, is there really traction behind this thing? And there is. And so US is a beta, but we're planning to expand this functionality to other jurisdictions in the world. Like, we're actually in discussions right now with European countries to do that, to extend this service to open an entity in Europe. Same in APAC, etc. The side effect that we were not expecting, and it's actually pretty interesting, is not only were markets where it's difficult to start a business interested in this product, many of the signups we've seen were, for example, European companies wanting to expand to the US and looking to build some, biz dev teams in the US. They were like, I love this tool. I can actually start my entity here from, Amsterdam in the US and have a US bank account, etc. It just saves me a trip to Delaware. There's nothing to do in Delaware apart of incorporating a company. It's not like you were going to Florida, right? It's saving me a travel and saving me so much time. And so we have a Delaware person in the room. Sorry? Florida. Sorry? Florida. Okay. You were on the right side. Okay. So we're actually discovering this kind of need that we actually, honestly, hadn't anticipated that much. And so in a future world, you could also imagine Atlas as a platform, as a business that you could use to expand globally and scale globally. Let me actually use Atlas to set up whatever in Singapore, and then in San Francisco, and then in whatever, right? So going forward, there's actually something pretty interesting. So how did we hack our way through? We launched this thing, Patrick launched this thing at the Mobile Web Congress in Barcelona, 100,000 attendees and some press and some media, pretty good coverage. We ended up with articles in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, that kind of spread pretty quickly. And I guess the big piece of it is we were relying on partners, because the whole question is, but how do you, how can anyone start a company with you guys? Just imagine, terror organizations, etc., or people selling, arms, weapons, etc. The reality is, to do this, we rely on a network of more than 100 partners in the world. So we have trusted partners that refer people to us to whom we open entities in the US for now, right? And so like the power of the ecosystem you're able to build around your brand is actually, a huge piece of the Atlas launch. Sorry, I don't remember who asked the question. But because like those people are actually, you're kind of, they're advocating for your product because those people have the incentive that their companies, grow globally. And that's kind of, one of the magical pieces about Atlas. Now, we did have a problem, which was we hadn't anticipated that much demand, so we're actually resourcing internally right now to kind of cope up with it. But yeah, I guess two things. One was like the kind of PR blast we were able to get, and the other piece was relying on that network of more than 100 partners across the world.
What were the main challenges for Stripe to expand to Europe or new countries in Europe?
That's a good question. So there's lots of challenges. So I think there are several types of questions that we have spent lots of time thinking about and struggling with, because and it all comes back to we are resource constrained, and so like we have to make trade-offs. Like we can't we know what has to be done, right? Like the problem is, how do you arbitrate between various things because you're resource constrained, especially on the product side, on the engineering side, right? And so I think three topics that we've been struggling with is one is kind of the demands from our US partners going international versus the demands of local businesses internationally. So the demands of a Wish or a Shopify or a Kickstarter, who are like Stripe users who go international, are not always exactly correlated with the demands of a Dutch company or a French company or a Spanish company that's growing domestically. And so how do you trade off, scaling with your large US users versus making sure you win local markets? We've been, doing several rounds around that topic. That's one. Two is, how much do you want to localize? Localize actually language. It seems pretty basic, but for the engineers among you, like you all know that it's actually a pretty big investment if you want to make your infrastructure like language agnostic, and that's another one. Like, do we localize language or do we not, right? Because then whether you localize in 5 languages or 25 or 100, it's kind of the same. But like, do you localize or not? And like AWS, Amazon Web Services, has not really has done everything in English, and that's worked well. So then your question is like, how different is your your user base, right? Is it really local or not, right? That's another one. A third one is, how do you scale your kind of sales or marketing efforts? What's the right model? And typically, like, what do you want to have in country versus more kind of centralized to be able to benefit from, scale? And why do you want to have people in country, right? Like, and there's all sorts of things that come into play, including how important is local language, right? When you talk to customers or even community, how important is building a community, right? I mean, I'm not going to give you answers to all this, but like, how do you structure a sales team is a pretty complex one as well. Yeah, so those are kind of three areas where we've spin quite a few cycles. Yeah. So, okay, I think, okay, so one is, and I'm sure Nilan is going to talk about that as well. One is kind of, Stripe really, from its founders, also has a kind of, is on a mission. Like our whole thing is, our whole thing is we want to increase the GDP of the internet. Okay, so what does that technically? What that means is we want to make it even easier for businesses to start and get paid, so that like there's more like to actually encourage entrepreneurship and starting new companies. We want to make it easy, because the easier it is, the less friction there is, the better products will appear, etc. And that kind of, that's a vision that kind of sticks. Like, honestly, I every day I do think, hey, I'm like actually happy to kind of contribute, hopefully, to like making, in my case, like, France, Southern Europe, whatever, like a startup nation, like, brings jobs, it brings, GDP, brings, value, right, to a society. And I am French. Like I like that idea of bringing value to the society or to the country or whatever, right? And that's something that I really believe in. I like that mission of, that long-term vision. I think another thing, it's pretty related. This is again pretty personal, but I think the founders and beyond the vision, I think the how much you look up to the founders is something that's you're blown away when you basically chat with John, Patrick, and like you can tell that this is something that's just getting started, and like they believe it, and I believe it too, because I feel like there's so much more to be done when I see the environment, the company, the level, the quality of the people, etc. So I don't know. I really feel like feel like we're part of, we're building something that's going to last, kind of thing, if that makes sense. Yeah, there was a question, I think. Yeah. We don't. I mean, again, it's back to the previous question. There's, I don't remember who said that. Someone like Steve Jobs or something, but well, I think it was Mike Moritz in a board who said you have to be pretty strong to kind of set the vision of where you want to go, because you have fundamental beliefs of this is where it should go, and competition in the end can is mostly a distraction. Like if you start adapting what you do for the long term because competition is raising 100K here or 100 million here or 100 million there, like that, I mean that doesn't keep me away. Like it doesn't excite me, right? Like reacting to what others have decided to do is not something that I feel is really the right thing, and by the way, motivating. And I think we believe pretty strongly in that as Stripe. Like we have this vision, sometimes a little stubborn on some things, right? We could be more realistic in some occasions, but I don't think it's a good strategy to rely on reacting to what competition does. I think that's what we believe. Yeah. So what was the main thing that enabled Stripe to grow exponentially at some point? Well, so define exponential growth. I think, I mean, what is true is that, as I said at the beginning, we're building products to kind of to power the next generation of web businesses, and I mean, that's one. Two is our revenue model is a per transaction kind of fee, right? And so the more we work with high growth companies and the more companies we work with, mathematically, when you add, when you add up the transactions of companies that grow exponentially and you have more and more companies that grow exponentially, well, there's kind of a double exponential effect there that's happening. So you're kind of, it's kind of like the shovels for the, during the gold rush. And if that's how, if the volume that you process is how you define exponential growth, then that's pretty mathematical. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's satisfying. Yeah, kind of ish. We can, by the way, chat afterwards for those who have any questions. Time for one more question? Yeah, a couple more. Yeah. So France and Southern Europe, and I'm working on Benelux. We're actually looking to make a hire in Benelux, based in Amsterdam, for someone who is interested. So again, I think we're just getting started, especially in your. Sorry, repeat the question. So I think the question was something like, "What's your strategy to grow in Europe? Is it sales driven? Is it ROI driven? How do you take decisions?" I guess. So we're actually still pretty lean in Europe. Like there's, we're not that many people in Europe yet. Big piece of Europe is still kind of in beta. And so our strategy is, so we want to build for the long term. We're never taking short-term decisions because they can have a short-term positive impact. And sometimes it's very frustrating, when, you got this, deal that you're not far from making, pretty cool thing, et cetera. Just need, just a product request, an additional product request, et cetera, and you don't get that because that's not like the long-term thing. It's just a short-term thing, whatever. But number one, we're always looking at long-term. And so when we hire someone, for example, when we have a new profile, we're looking at we're not looking at can this person do the job for a year and a half. We're looking can this person do, grow at Stripe, right? And that's actually, it's actually not an easy one because when you open up a new market, you could imagine that there's profiles to kind of be a market maker, but then 2 years down the line, it's not a market maker role anymore. It's maybe more of a kind of whatever consultative sales role. That's one. So building for the long term. Our strategy is always around product. I think I mentioned the ideal thing. I think we've seen these past 2 years mostly as let's make sure we know what to build for Europe and to make, bring, whatever we can bring best to European startups and companies. And we're a super product oriented focused company. So that's, second piece of the cake. What else? Product. And then the last piece is building for scale, right? In the end, you want to be a company that kind of, you want to be a company that scales, and in two senses. One in terms of culture, right? We want a pretty common culture, shared between San Francisco and Amsterdam and Paris and London, whatever. That's not easy. It's really not easy. And number two, you actually want to work in an efficient way, right? And scale, like Stripe is a very specific business, right? This is not Google, this is not Facebook, it's a different type of business, right? It doesn't scale the same. And so how do you figure that model out, as I discussed before, is, I mean, this is not our strategy, but it's one of the questions we're still figuring out right now. Does that make sense?